Welcome, independent researchers, skeptics, and all of humankind, Shadow Citizen. Shadow Citizen will explore the shadows of an alternate reality. Your hosts, Rachael L. McINtosh.
All right. Once again, I am so happy to be here with all of you. I'm Rachael L. McIntosh. I'm the host of Shadow Citizen. And tonight we have a guest that I think you will all recognize if you've listened to this show before, James Perloff. He is the author of Shadows of Power. He wrote for the New American Magazine for nearly 3 decades. His newest book, Truth is a Lonely Warrior, is a comprehensive look at this, what he calls the satanic drive for world government. He also wrote the script for Free Minds Films' latest documentary, Shadow Ring. It's an excellent movie. You should watch it if you haven't seen it. And he was a lead-off speaker at the 2015 New York City Liberty Fest. His website is jamesperloff.com, and he's on Twitter, where he's very accessible, as James Perloff. And I'd like to introduce him right now. James, are you here?
I'm here. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Oh, right on. Okay. Well, tonight, what we're going to do, I want to talk about, you're a prolific blogger, by the way. People, if you go to his website, jamesperloff.com, you'll see a bunch of his writing. And I know he has a new blog post that he wants to talk about, and it has to do with 9/11, which is a big, hot topic for me because my books also deal with 9/11. So why don't you start off, James, about what you want to talk about 9/11? You have like a new theory you want to hit off.
Yeah, what I want to do is reconstruct the events of 9/11 as closely as we can and move closer towards the truth on this. And I want to talk about 3 major components of 9/11, what brought the towers down, what initially struck the towers, and what happened to the planes and the passengers. And I know some people in the audience will say, you know what, this has been gone over hundreds of times, but I do hope that we'll bring some fresh things to light tonight on the search for truth. And by the way, my views are my views. I'm not trying to be dogmatic about anything. And Rachael, also, I wanted to mention that before we talk about how 9/11 was done, there's a very valid complaint that's often voiced amongst the people in the truth movement, which is, it'll run something like this. I don't really care how it was done. The important thing is we know that the government story was bogus. Let's not have any infighting about how it was done. The important thing is to find the criminals and bring them to justice. And I think that is a very legitimate grievance. But, if you are a prosecutor, you have to talk about both the who and the how. I mean, you can't just go up there and say Joe Dotes committed this murder without showing how he committed it. You have to prove how he committed it. And at the same time, a prosecutor doesn't go before a jury and say how a crime was done and not identify the suspect. And so you can't separate the who from the how. So I primarily want to talk about the how of 9/11, but I want to start out by talking about the very important who.
Okay.
And I believe that there is a phrase we use in the 9/11 movement that I think has confused the issue a little bit, and that phrase is 9/11 was an inside job. And what I mean by that is that I believe a more correct rendering would be 9/11 was an outside job done by Israeli operatives, but with the cooperation, consent, and some help from the American side. And if you want a perfect analogy to that, Rachael, you recently did a fantastic interview on the USS Liberty with Bryce Lockwood.
That was
a dynamite interview. And he even pointed out that the USS Liberty attack led to 9/11 because the Israelis knew that they could attack us with impunity after that. But the analogy I want to point out is this. In the case of the USS Liberty, it's true that Lyndon Johnson, the president, and the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, helped out by recalling the fighters sent to rescue the Liberty twice, and they ordered a subsequent cover-up. But the actual hands-on grunt attack was carried out by the Israelis. I mean, it wasn't the U.S. Air Force attacking the USS Liberty. It was Israelis who were carrying out the actual attack. And that is, I believe, the proper framework for discussion of 9/11.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Go back up, because this is a big deal to say, okay, the Israelis did 9/11. Israel is our ally. It's our only ally in the Middle East.
Even Netanyahu would laugh if he heard you say that to himself. Yeah. Okay.
No, but
all right.
I got to walk people through this, because this is a big accusation. Even most people have not heard of the USS Liberty, just so you know. People that listen to my show, of course, have listened to it, and they just listened to the same exact interview you're talking about. In fact, my mother went last night to have, dinner with a friend, and she told her friends that, my daughter interviewed some people on this ship, the USS Liberty. They had no idea. And the husband in this family, he had been in the Marines. And they're 70 years old. They had never heard of this, ever. In fact, the woman that they were at dinner with said, you should make sure Rachael does background checks on the people she does on her show.
Okay, they live in the Matrix. Okay, the USS Liberty was covered up, and the Captain McGonigal, the commander of the ship, had to get his Congressional Medal of Honor in a Navy shipyard. The only Congressional Medal of Honor winner not to get White House recognition, and that's I think you kind of sensed the power of AIPAC, Rachael, when you did that interview, and the impact because we're not talking. People think, well, how could Israel have that much influence in the United States? It's a tiny country, but it's the Rothschild proxy state, and the Rothschilds are the most powerful family in the world, the richest in the world. And let's talk a little about the evidence that Israel was involved with 9/11.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
And I want to recommend people go to a particular blog post that I think is the most comprehensive and concise. It's the WikiSpooks post called 9/11 Israel Did It. And let me just give you a sampling of highlights, okay? We'll start with the dancing Israelis. I think most of our audience would be familiar with it. The 5 dancing Israelis, at least 2 of whom were later proven to be Mossad agents. They photographed the event. They photographed the Twin Towers collapsing. And they high-fived each other. They were laughing, dancing. They photographed themselves holding a lighter in front of the collapsed buildings. Now, these guys are pretty sick-minded because they were cheering for the death of thousands of Americans. Now, when they drove off in a van, a neighbor wrote down the license plate. Doesn't even mention on CNN, but what was not mentioned by CNN was when they were arrested, it turned out that they were Israelis. And 2 months later, they were sent back to Israel, which, for guys who knew all about the attack in advance, would be surprising until you realize that the man put in charge of the Justice Department's investigation of 9/11 was Michael Chertoff. Now, Chertoff's parents were founding citizens of Israel, and his mother was an agent of the Mossad. Now, is it surprising that the son of a Mossad agent sends home all the arrested Israelites after 9/11.
Wait, excuse me. Chertoff's parents were founders of Israel?
They were founding citizens of Israel going back to 48, and his mother was in the Mossad. Then how about airport security? At all 3 airports where the aircraft took off, the security is run by Hunsley USA, a wholly owned subsidiary of ICTS International, which is owned by 2 Israelis. So airport security is in Israeli hands. Then we've got Lucky Larry Silverstein, the new owner of the World Trade Center. Now, as most of our listeners know, he bought it less than 2 months before the event, and he invested $124 million. He got an insurance payout of almost $5 billion. That's a pretty good return on your investment. And of course, Lucky Larry also managed to luckily avoid being at the World Trade Center on the morning of the attack due to a fortuitous doctor's appointment. But what a lot of people may not know is he was such good friends with Benjamin Netanyahu that Netanyahu would call him every Sunday. Now, this is from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, November 2001, quote, "Every Sunday afternoon, New York Times, Netanyahu would call Silverstein. It made no difference what the subject was, where Netanyahu was. He would always call," unquote. So there's another Israeli connection. Another would be Zim Navigational, the only Israeli firm in the World Trade Center. I believe they'd been there for 30 years, and they broke their lease just before 9/11 and moved someplace else. You also have the head of the 9/11 Commission was Philip Zelikow, a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen. Why would you want to put somebody with sworn loyalty to another nation in charge of the 9/11 Commission? You've got
we've got that all over the United States government anyway. We've got dual citizens all over the place.
Yeah, it's crazy. But especially in such a sensitive position.
I know.
Also, Bush's chairman of his defense policy board on 9/11, Richard Pearl, he was actually caught by the NSA spying for Israel back in 1970, was never prosecuted. Then on 9/11, you had the Israeli instant messaging company Odigo. Their employees received a warning not to be in the World Trade Center 2 hours before the attack. You've got P-Tech, a software firm linked to Mossad, providing the FAA, the FBI, and the armed forces with sensitive software that they were using that morning. But here's one of my favorites. One of my favorites. We're going to get into this guy later. Is Danny Lewin. Now, Danny Lewin was on Flight 11, and he was a former captain in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and he also was in their Sayeret Matkal, which is it's their special ops. It's like Navy SEALs. They specialized in counterterrorism, hostage rescue, and assassination. And here's something, this is from mainstream media. The guy could bench press 315 pounds, and he was, quote, trained to kill terrorists with a pen or credit card or just with his bare hands, unquote. Now, okay, that might not be suspicious.
With a credit card. Okay.
With a credit card.
Yeah, all right.
Some people are killed by credit cards, but not, physically. But, okay, in 2000, the year before the attacks, Danny had himself photographed, an official portrait on a bench in front of two panels that looked like the Twin Towers. Now, here's the thing. He's wearing a watch. If you blow up the watch, you'll find that it's a Swatch watch, and the model name was Hijacker. And not only that, the second hand, the minute hand, and the hour hand were all on the 11, and the date was sent to the 11th, even though the picture was not taken on the 11th. Now, Rachael, you know what the odds are of all four time indicators being on the 11 at once?
Very
of course,
low.
you don't, but I figured it out, okay? It's more than 20,000 to 1. He obviously deliberately stopped it on those numbers, okay? If you multiply that times the odds of the watch being named the Hijacker, that was the official model number. And by the way, you can see pictures of the watch and the Swatch watch ad for this on my blog post, Unraveling the Mysteries of Flight 11, and I'll have it on my new post, which is upcoming. We're pre-recording this show tonight. I'll mention it's, so I'll hopefully have my new post up by then. But remember this too, Rachael. On Flight 11 on 9/11, he was in row 9 of Flight 11 on 9/11. And if you think all this is a coincidence, I'm sorry.
Now, wait, you said he was wearing a Swatch watch?
Yes, and the model name was Hijacker. And you can see the ad for the Hijacker Swatch watch. That's the model he chose to wear with everything said on the 11 with a big smile on his face.
Because it's just like, who is this guy and why is he running our country? But he recently came out and he's wearing a very nice suit and he's wearing a blue Swatch watch. And I started looking around like, why is he wearing a Swatch watch? And then I realized about 2 years before that, maybe 3 years before that, all these different investment people, it was like a fad. Like, I guess not even 3 years, maybe 10 years. I don't know how long this fad's been going on, but they wear Swatch watches to their meetings. I didn't know that. I'm not an investment type of person, but these like really high-powered investment people, like at Goldman Sachs, they wear Swatch watches to their meetings.
And when did that start, you know?
I'll have to look it up, but I was on my Facebook page, and I was just astounded because it was just a weird image. You had this really expensive suit, and then you had this, and you could tell they pulled the sleeve away so you could see the blue Swatch watch. It was a kind of a Tiffany blue. It was a kind of a Tiffany blue.
I guess we won't have a tie report tonight, your famous tie report, but we've got a watch report.
Yeah, the watches. But yeah, it was a Swatch watch thing. It was very interesting. I think it was maybe Bloomberg. I think it was Bloomberg magazine did a piece about the Swatch watch thing with the.
Well, it must have some significance, like a Masonic type of, it's like an indicator of some kind, I would guess. But, I've only covered about 5% of the Israeli connections to 9/11, and I do want to recommend that people go to the Wikispooks article, 9/11 Israel Did It, for the other 95%. But there's just one more remark in closing about this. If you're a police detective, you trying to solve a murder, one of the first questions you will ask is who benefited from the crime. Now, in the case of 9/11, did America benefit? No. I mean, we've had police state developed here, and we spent trillions of dollars on unnecessary wars and thousands of casualties. Did Muslims benefit? No. They did not benefit. They've seen the Middle East turned into chaos, from Egypt to Afghanistan to Iraq to Libya, now in Syria. Now it's Yemen. Next it may be Iran. They didn't benefit from 9/11. The only beneficiary was Israel, who sat back and watched America knock off their enemies one by one as they prepare for what they call the Greater Israel Yinon Plan. And the best article I've seen on that would be Global Research, Greater Israel. Just type that into your search engine. But that's the WHO, along, of course, with Cheney and the American cooperation. But I want to get to the how. But before I do you have any further comments?
No. It's just really hard for people to get their head around what you're saying about Israel, because they're supposed to be our friends.
Yeah, they're our friend when they attacked USS Liberty, when they tricked us into attacking Libya in 1986 by planting a Trojan in Libya that made us think that Libya did the La Belle discotheque bombing, and when they attacked tried to attack us in the Lavon affair in 1954, always disguised as Arabs. That goes back to the bombing of the King David Hotel in 1946, when they went in as disguised as Arabs and blew up the hotel with British headquarters in it. It's their modus operandi. Pretend, same thing with the Liberty, right? They flew an unmarked plane, so they would think that an Egyptian Air Force crew took down the Liberty. But let's go on to the how. And I think a great way to open with a how, because I don't want to do all the talking, would be to throw it back to you, because Rachael, some of the people listening tonight will be people who I've tweeted this show to, and they won't be familiar with you, but you worked for one of America's top 6 defense contractors for years, in the years lead up to 9/11. And you had the absolutely unique experience of being shown the blueprints for Building 7. And it was even indicated to you that there was some type of mechanism by which this building would collapse. And I know that it was a casual conversation, and I know that they didn't detail how it would collapse, but why don't you tell folks about that? I'm sorry, we still on board?
Yeah, I know. I can't hear you. You totally cut out right there.
Okay, well, how much did you hear me say? You're cutting out on me too. I don't think somebody doesn't like this conversation going on.
Let's just keep talking. You want to talk about Building 7? Well, yeah, I did. I worked for a defense contractor. I worked for L3 Communications. Back then, that's what it was called, L3 Communications. It's since changed its name. It's called L3 Systems or something like that. I don't know what it is now. I think they've changed their name. But at that time, I was the marketing communications specialist. They called it a specialist. I really still don't really know what the heck that had to do with anything, but I was basically the go-to person to set up meetings with people, and I was in charge of going through the RFPs, which are the request for proposals from the government, and I was in charge of the out-of-house communications, which meant any proposal going out. And I was in charge of this for 5 divisions. At one point or another, all told, it was 5 divisions, 5 different divisions of this huge company. Well, I had to do the website. I had to do the press releases. So a lot of the stuff I did was, it was anything that went out of the house. Well, there was one time we had this meeting, and we were trying to get, our little division was trying to get sold or traded. And I set up the meeting because I met with a man over at Drumthwacket, which is the name of the governor's mansion in New Jersey. and he was part of a company called Plan Graphics. And he indicated to me that they were going bankrupt. And at that point, I thought it would be really interesting and really great if we bought their company, added it to us, and would make us look, our little division look much more powerful, like we had more stuff going on. So anyhow, there was this meeting where we were trying to sell our division off to somebody else or to another company or to, I don't know what they were trying to do, to tell you the truth. But we had big, important people there. And the reason why they were there with us is because we had previously responded to the request for proposal to put in the command and control center for the emergency response center that Rudolph Giuliani wanted in that building. Of course, when we applied for that, it was supposed to be in a basement. We didn't get the contract. And when I was there in this meeting with these really important people, this guy from Plan Graphics, we're just chatting. They brought the blueprints in. They brought all different blueprints. I think he was trying to showcase all the buildings they had done these three-dimensional models for. And, I was like, oh, what's this? And I was like, oh, yeah, it's the building we were going to put our command and control center. And he's like, yeah. So and I was like, well, what is this thing? What does this mean? Just being the dumb blonde kind of thing, making time before the big meeting. And he showed me with his finger. He ran it down. He said, blah, 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 blah. This building was going to fall down. That's all I really know about Building 7 and that but I do know that they knew if it was going to fall down, it would collapse along a certain line in that building. And
by the way, you cut out right after you said the building was going to fall, but I think we probably sort of caught enough of that conversation. It's unfortunate. I know that I've heard from our producer that my voice is cut out a little bit too, so I'm not quite sure how much of our conversation is totally being heard by the audience. Are you hearing me right now?
I hear you right now, just fine.
Okay.
I'm just going to keep talking
We'll just keep going and
keep talking.
Yeah, we'll keep going. Okay, let's get on to the. Oh, by the way, I just want to tell people if they want to know what Rachael's talking about, all of your experiences in the significant experiences in the defense industry are in your series of novels called Security Through Absurdity, and you had to write it as a novel because to protect yourself. I know you had a certain confidentiality understandings when you worked in the defense industry, and I realized as I read these books, it's not just you're protecting. There are other people too that if you get in trouble if their real names were known. But people should check out your novels, Security Through Absurdity, for some of the things we'll be mentioning that you saw tonight.
Oh, thanks for the plug there.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, James. That was cool. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about what brought down the towers. Now, this is the first of our three hows. And, of course, there's three major schools of thought in the 9/11 movement. One is nanothermite, which is advocated by architects and engineers for 9/11 truth, and another is directed energy weapons, which is advocated by Dr. Judy Wood. And tonight I'll be talking about what I advocate, which is that it was two small nuclear devices, two suitcase nukes in the basement that brought them down. This is the nuclear hypothesis, which is the third hypothesis. But I want to mention something, Rachael, which is that I know that you've expressed your respect for Dr. Judy Wood, and I hang out with truthers in Boston, and I have friends in this group who are members of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth who they advocate nanothermite. It doesn't get with the way of our friendship, okay? I know it's a topic that gets bitterly disputed sometime, but I'm just going to give you what I call my top 10 reasons why I believe that the towers were nuked.
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay.
Because after this, forget about we're no longer friends.
Okay. Oh, yeah. You asked for it. You asked for it. All right. Okay. So, by the way, this is in great detail in my blog post at jamesperloff.com called To 9/11 and Beyond. But here we go. My top 10 reasons for tonight's discussion. Number one. Okay, as we all know, first responders are getting lots of cancer, but what cancer do they get at a higher than normal rate more than any other cancer? And the answer is thyroid cancer. And why is that significant? Because thyroid cancer is a signature of an atomic bomb. An atomic bomb will give off something called iodine-131. It will collect in your thyroid, and this is why a lot of people actually keep potassium iodide tablets on hand. protects your thyroid during a nuclear attack. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, the U.S. Geological Survey examined the dust samples from the World Trade Center. And in those dust samples, they found inexplicably high concentrations of the products of nuclear fission, including isotopes of uranium, strontium, barium, thorium, beryllium, etc. These concentrations could only be explained by a nuclear event. Now, the U.S. Geological Survey stayed quiet about this. They didn't call attention to it, but it was vetted by an author named William Tahill in a 2006 book called Ground Zero: The Nuclear Demolition of the World Trade Center. That is the pioneering book on nuclear demolition, and still much ignored and not noticed in the alternative media. By the way, the phrase ground zero up until 9/11 was only used for the site of a nuclear bomb. All right. Reason number three. You interrupt me anytime, Rachael. The molten steel. There was lots of molten steel down in the basement and underneath the rubble. And the fires, as you know, kept burning for over 3 months. And extraordinary heat is yet another signature of an atomic bomb. You know, at the center of an atomic explosion actually reaches millions of degrees, and then as you go further out, it's hundreds of thousands of degrees and thousands of degrees. I was talking on a radio show with a New York City host named Tom Kiley. Mm-hmm. And he was actually there on the day of 9/11. He used to be a consultant at the World Trade Center, and he got caught up in that dust cloud. His people he was with were trying to get inside of a revolving door, but he couldn't get in time. He said how warm that cloud was. This is a hot event. So that's reason number three. And I just want to clarify what we're talking about is and this is I've come to this conclusion with consultation with others who are very familiar with nuclear weapons, that we're talking about is suitcase nukes that have been placed in the very lowest point of the World Trade Center, and that would be the service pits of Elevator 50. There's an Elevator 50 in both towers. It's the only elevator that went the full length of both twin towers, and it's the only one whose service pits were carved into the bedrock beneath the World Trade Center. You know, there were 6 basement levels of the World Trade Center. It went very deep. So this is the deepest point. And this is the ideal location to launch a nuke, because the bedrock will contain the downward force and the sideward force of the blast and direct it upwards. And we're going to be talking more about the significance of this later. But all right, reason number 4 why this was an atomic event was the explosive force. You know, Rachael, there were chunks of steel that weighed multiple tons that were thrown hundreds of feet. There was a chunk that was impaled in the American Express building across the street. And there were chunks of weighing multiple tons that flew 600 feet and knocked over the Winter Garden Atrium building. Now, that's not from a collapse. That is from an explosion. And what's the most powerful explosive known to man? It is an atomic bomb. You really don't have to go to an exotic weapon for this. The atomic bomb will have that force. Reason number 5. The inner contents of the towers were totally vaporized. No furniture was left. There was no toilet survived. No computers survived. Of course, no people survived. The only bodies they found were people who jumped before the event, before the explosion. There were 10,000 filing cabinets in the World Trade Center. Of those, only 1 from the basement survived. So the insides were vaporized, and again, an atomic explosion can account for this. You know, it's not like a stick of dynamite. It has 1 boom and it's over. An atomic explosion is the bomb that keeps on giving. It keeps on exploding. It keeps on exploding, applying that powerful force. So it can account for the vaporization of the World Trade Center. Number 6, again, interrupt me anytime. The seismograph readings at Columbia University's observatory at Palisades, New York, which is about 20 miles to the north. There, if you look at it, Rachael, there's this incredible spike at the time that the World Trade Center buildings collapsed, the 2 collapses. It shows the so-called plane hits. There's a little blip for that, but when the towers explode, the seismography just goes off the charts. It's an off-the-charts explosion. And, you know, just collapsing rubble is not going to do that, or even a series of little explosions. You're talking about 1 big boom, and that's another evidence in favor of nuclear.
Can I ask a question? You said that when the plane hit.
Well, we're going to clarify that later, but I'm talking about what was supposed to be the plane, or what was supposed to be the plane hitting. That was recorded at Palisades, New York. That was recorded, but it's a small blip compared to what happened when the towers went down. It's just a small blip in comparison. Mm-hmm. Did I answer any question you had, or?
No. Well, yeah. Go ahead. Keep going.
Now, this next one is something that a lot of people haven't heard of. Okay. A nuclear explosion accounts for what happens to the other buildings of the World Trade Center complex. Now, as you probably know, Building 5 was engulfed in flames, and the fire department had to put it out. Building 6 was cratered out. I mean, the whole building was destroyed internally, with a crater going all the way down to the basement. In Building 7, the famous Building 7, which obviously came down later that afternoon, about 5 o'clock, with controlled demolition. Building 7 was on fire. There were big fires in Building 7. And one of the best witnesses to that was Barry Jennings, who was a emergency coordinator for the New York Housing Authority. He and a colleague were going down the steps of Building 7, and he said there was a massive explosion from the bottom of the building. It tore out the stairs, so they had to retreat back upstairs, and they finally rescued by the fire department. And he said it was incredibly hot in Building 7, which, by the way, is the furthest one of all the buildings in the World Trade Center complex. It's the furthest one for the Twin Towers. So how does a nuclear explosion account for this? Because the World Trade Center was all interconnected underground. And most people don't know this because they've suppressed the blueprints, but we know it from it's a property risk report prepared for Larry Silverstein's properties, okay, that there was this underground water drainage system for what do they call it specifically? It was stormwater drainage system. I'm sorry. It was 3 feet wide, and of course it went down to these service pits of elevator 50 I was talking about. When you want to drain out flood water, okay, the flood water will naturally flow down to the lowest point of any building, and so not only would it be the ideal place to launch a nuke, which would follow the path of least resistance up that elevator shaft, okay? But it also follow the path of least resistance through these pipes that are leading out through this system that interconnects the entire World Trade Center underground. And so what you're looking at in buildings 5, 6, and 7, all these buildings were cratered out and blown out with hot explosions, is a secondary effect of the nuke. Because, these buildings did not catch fire before the Twin Towers went down. If they had, then cameras would have panned down. You have news announcers saying, gee, we seem to have some fire in Building 7. No, it was not before the towers came down. It was a secondary effect. And I'll show you a proof of this in my article to 9/11 Beyond. You can actually see geysers shooting up from the ground. First it's steam, then it's smoke. This is the underground water pipe that's just exploding from overpressure as the nuke is traveling through it. So that is, I think that is I didn't come to this conclusion on my own. I had to help with it. But this is, I think, the best explanation of what happened to buildings 5, 6, and 7. Secondary effect from a nuke going off in the basement of the World Trade Center.
That's okay. I go ahead. I buy that. However, I know since, Building 7 didn't have a basement.
Yeah, but it was still connected connected to the flooding system.
Okay.
Even without a basement, you can have a flood and low flood.
Okay.
And this all accounts for the toasted cars and garages because they were also part of that system. Okay. Well, reason number 8 is probably certainly not the strongest one. But there was this massive dust cloud everyone was fleeing. Mm-hmm. I just want to point out, if you watch any nuke, a U.S. military nuke exploding, you'll find it creates a massive expanding dust cloud at ground level. It's not just a mushroom cloud. At ground level, you have this massive cloud. Now, I know that when a building just collapses, there'll be a dust cloud, but usually people can stand a couple blocks away in a standard demolition, and they're still safe. And I'll grant that this is an incredibly tall building, but if you compare that dust cloud seemed to have a life of its own. It was just amazing what people went through who were running from it, and it does compare to the image you see of a nuclear dust cloud. Well, reason number 9 actually comes from your own show. Believe it or not, your own show. Okay, you had Susan Lindauer on, our mutual friend Susan Lindauer. You've been on a show. I've been on a show. She's been on your show for a 2-hour conversation. And that's when I first picked up on. I'd read it before, but I hadn't paid attention before. When she was in the CIA, and she was the cousin of Andrew Card, who was the chief of staff of George Bush, the CIA received advance warning of 9/11. Not a lot of specifics, but they told it would involve an attack on the World Trade Center. And one of the things she mentioned on your show was that it would involve the destruction of the World Trade Center with a mini nuke. And if people want to hear that, it's at the 29-minute mark of her interview with you. She talks about it for about a minute. And I wanted to check that because somebody challenged me and said, well, Susan Lindauer probably just made this up now. So I went back to her book, which is called Extreme Prejudice, published 7 years ago. And she does talk about the nuke in there. And that references earlier courtroom testimony from years before that. So this is not something she just made up. But she says she tried to warn the Justice Department of the attack, and John Ashcroft wouldn't pay attention, and she even sat outside in her car from Andrew Card's home, hoping to warn him. And as you know, for her trouble, she was finally, as a whistleblower, she was thrown in prison, federal prison.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's my reason number 9. And for reason number 10, it comes from Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, in 1995, Netanyahu wrote a book called Fighting Terrorism. I'm going to quote it. Such groups nullify the need to have air power or intercontinental missiles as delivery systems for an Islamic nuclear payload. They will be the delivery system. And the worst of such scenarios, the consequences could not be a car bomb, but a nuclear bomb in the basement of the World Trade Center, unquote. And he italicized nuclear. So he's already telling you 6 years before 9/11, he expects a nuclear bomb in the basement of the World Trade Center. But it's not just that, Rachael. He also spoke of this after 9/11. I want to play a clip for you. And if I can't get the clip to play, I'm going to quote it myself. Okay, let me see if I can get you Benjamin Netanyahu talking to Tom Brokaw 2 days after 9/11. Let's see if I can get this clip going. Hold on a second here.
We have here is something far worse. In 1995, I wrote a book called Fighting Terrorism, and I said that if we don't arrest the tide of Islamic militant Islamic terrorism, then the next thing that will be is not a car bomb in the World Trade Center, but a nuclear bomb. Now, it wasn't a nuclear bomb. It was a 350-ton conventional bomb. But
all right, Rachael, did you hear that okay?
Yeah, I heard it fine. I heard it perfect.
Okay. So what's significant here is he says this is after 9/11. He says first he talks about nuclear bomb, and then perhaps realizing he said too much. But it was a conventional bomb. Now, and he even gives a specific yield, 350 tons. Now that's very specific. Now here's the thing, Rachael. This is after 9/11. He's talking to Tom Brokaw. All America has been told that the Twin Towers collapsed due to plane strikes, right? But Netanyahu was saying right on there it was a bomb. And he knows the precise tonnage of the bomb, 350 tons. Tom Brokaw should have said, whoa. Are you saying a bomb took down the World Trade Center? But this is afterwards. And he's letting it slip. So that's Benjamin Netanyahu. And that is my proof. I won't call it proof. It's evidence number 10 that points towards a nuclear weapon in the World Trade Center.
So the nuclear part doesn't really account for the building just collapsing on its own footprint.
Well, what happened, I believe, Rachael, with the nuke in the bedrock at the lowest point of the World Trade Center, it would follow the path of least resistance up the elevator shaft of elevator 50, and it would reach that point before it reached the edges of the World Trade Center building, the periphery of the building, because it's got to cut through all those steel columns. Okay, but the first thing it's going to do is go right through the empty space of the elevator shaft and start going, billowing out what we'll call the plane holes, the holes that are already smoking. Okay, and then that as it starts to go through, it's cutting through. The elevator 50 in the center. It's gradually expanding. It's destroying those steel columns, and when most of the steel columns have gone, there's nothing to support the top of the building anymore. So the top of the building just is almost falling through empty space at that point. So it does go down. Okay, there is that. So there
was no controlled demolition in this theory. There's no.
Oh, no, I believe there are definitely planted explosives on the level of what we call the plant strikes. No question about it. And I believe that probably included thermite, which they found evidence for. But I think that the explosion itself that destroyed the World Trade Center was a nuclear event.
Oh, okay. All right. So we got the suitcase bomb, and then we've got controlled demolition, like somehow set up in the building beforehand.
Yeah, but I don't think the controlled demolition took it down. I think that the explosives that were planted, you've heard of the Israeli art students that cut their way to the outside of the building. It's incredible.
Yeah, what was it, honestly, what was the deal with that?
I think they're creating the explosives that will create what they call the plane hole. But we're going to get into that next. Okay.
Okay.
By the way, there's one other thing. The common objection to this is, okay, so where are the Geiger counter readings? And you actually took a Geiger counter down. Tell us about that.
I went down to the World Trade Center when they were starting to build the new tower that's there now. It was, everything was just kind of cleared away at that point. And I went down with a Geiger counter. A friend of mine had a Geiger counter, and we went down together. And it came back even less than a banana. I was like, how is that even possible? And that's the guy that was with me with this Geiger counter. He's like, oh, that's giving you less than a banana. I was like, what does that mean? He goes, bananas emit radiation off of them, healthy bananas, and you buy and you eat them. He goes, right now, it's less than a banana right here.
And what year was that?
That was, I guess, 1 year later when they had cleared away and they were starting to build. We knew they were going to start building the new tower. In fact, we went to go look at the different mock-ups the different architects had done for the contest. That's what we were doing that day.
Okay, so let me talk about why we don't get the Geiger counter readings on these two nukes. And the reason is, there's different types of nuclear bombs. The Hiroshima bomb and the Nagasaki bomb cause horrible radiation effects. But nuclear bombs are made of a combination of fission and fusion. Fission is the breaking apart of atomic particles. It gives off huge amounts of radiation. Fusion is fusing together atomic parts. It gives off very little radiation. So if you've got a high fusion bomb, it's going to give out a minimal radiation. Now, during the Cold War, the United States started to develop high fusion bombs. Now, these have a minimum of fission, a minimum of radiation. They call them battlefield nukes, because you're in a battlefield situation, Rachael. You don't want to use a bomb that's got lots of radiation. It's going to affect your own troops, right? So, in fact, Dr. Edward Teller said he hoped to develop a completely clean nuke that would have no radiation at all. So what kind of nukes would Israel use? Now, by the way, I meant to mention that a suitcase nuke is so small you can carry it in a backpack. It's very easy to plant. And so if you've got, you give permission by Larry Silverstein, very easy just to go down to the basement and put him there, okay? But what kind of nukes would Israel have? Well, obviously it doesn't want high radiation bombs, because if it gets into a war with its neighbors, it doesn't want radiation blowing back to Tel Aviv. So we don't know, because it's a state secret, but obviously they would emphasize high fusion bombs, very low radiation. And that's clearly what they would have used on 9/11. But they don't want to, bump off their friends at Goldman Sachs. They're just trying to scare America into a war. But there are three other factors I should mention. Number one, the U.S. did tests. They found when atomic bomb is blown up in a shaft, which this would be the equivalent of a shaft, it gives off a little radiation compared to a bomb that's exploded at ground level. Number two, Hurricane Erin, which Judy Wood talks about? Yeah. Hurricane Erin was this really incredibly weird hurricane. It was on a direct path from the Caribbean to New York. And it was off the coast of New York on 9/11. And then after 9/11, it hooked a Huey. It did a Huey, and it went off and went up to Greenland. Now, she interprets that as this is where the directed energy weapons got their energy. But there's another interpretation, which is that a low pressure system like a hurricane will suck the air out of the neighboring higher pressure areas. And so any radiation in New York City's atmosphere would have been pulled out to sea and then brought away from the area by Hurricane Erin. That's among the reasons we're giving here for the low radiation. Another is that even though 9/11 was a sunny day, for the next several days it rained in New York City, and that would reduce the radiation in the atmosphere. The main reason, though, there would be low radiation, Rachael, is simply there was a low radiation bomb, a strategic battlefield tactical nuke.
Okay. All right. Now, would there be, and I don't know, would there be like a signature for this type of bomb? Like, I don't know. I've heard people that go do forensics at different war sites. They know exactly what type of bomb and what country it comes from. Would there be some sort of...
I don't think there'd be any material left, like the casing would have all been destroyed, so I don't think there'd be anything with a number on it or something you could trace it back, especially under that rubble. But I consider the signatures to be things like the thyroid cancer, the nuclear fission products, and the dust samples. That would be forensic evidence. And the molten steel. I think those are all signatures of an atomic event.
Okay. All right. And so, but you don't think that Judy Wood's directed energy weapon is feasible? You think that's kind of a getting...
Well, I don't think we need to resort to that. I think that a nuclear bomb can do everything that we saw that day. I think it accounts for all the phenomena.
All right.
And it's known. I mean, it's a known event and directed energy. We just haven't observed them to know what they do. But we've observed atomic bombs many times. So I think, especially, what do you think Israel's got in its arsenal? Satellite-based weapons or nukes, I think. If we're thinking Israel did this, I think we're talking nukes.
Yeah, okay.
And, if we're done with that topic, I wanted to talk next about what hit the towers, because that's another very subject of great debate and interest in the 9/11 truth movement. And I think we have about 7 minutes here before we hit a break.
Yeah, you're keeping your eye on the clock. Go ahead, keep going.
Okay. All right, so, but actually I want to start again with you, Rachael, because your defense company actually built the camera that all the networks were using. It was on that helicopter, that chopper that was filming the buildings before they collapsed. So why don't you talk about that?
Oh yeah. No, that was just a weirdo thing. I remember on September 11th, that very day, we got a communication that we were supposed to kind of hype up that was our camera. Amazing. Like they put it on satellites and they can see literally like me drinking, what type of coffee. Do I have Starbucks or do I have Dunkin' Donuts? They can tell from space. That's the type of, resolution these things get. But anyhow, we had one of our cameras on this helicopter flying around, and it was being sent to ABC 7 in New York, and that was the footage that was being used and blasted out to all the stations. Yeah.
By the way, I only heard the second half of what you said. We'll learn over the break if the Scotch got it. No.
Okay. Well, so that was, it was the company that made that camper is called Westcam. It was a division of L3 Communications, Westcam. And go ahead.
And I understand also that unknown to most people, there was actually a delay in what people were looking at. You said it was like 7 seconds?
Yeah, there's definitely a 7-second delay. And yeah, I know. So is James. This is a tough interview. No, yeah, I just keep talking.
Okay. Okay, Rachael. This is a good plug for your book, because if people want to find out the details they missed when you broke up, they need to buy your book, Security Through Absurdity, to find out all these details about your experiences in the defense industry. But so I'm going to go on with what hit the towers, at least my belief.
Yeah.
And
we got a few minutes left. Just a few. You want to just give us some teasers? Because we're going to go to break.
We'll start and then we'll pick up after the break. Okay. First of all, when I first heard the no planes hitting the towers theory, what my reaction was, Rachael. I thought, oh, you dummies, you're getting into this cognitive dissonance. You're going to make us all look ridiculous. Don't you know this is just to make us look all ridiculous? No planes hit the towers. Now, let me just tell you how I evolved on this. I started paying attention because of some people I respected who were saying this, and I started thinking. I said, Shanksville. There's a 10-foot deep crater, about 20 feet wide. It was smoking, and there's no bodies. It doesn't look like a regular plane wreck. You look at MH317 or any of these other plane wrecks. There's wreckage and bodies all over the place. What happened at Shanksville? I mean, it doesn't look like there was a plane there. And then what about the Pentagon? We have, again, the dearth of evidence. In fact, speaking of dearth, let me quote Lieutenant Colonel Karen Katowski, Ph.D., U.S. Air Force retired who was at the Pentagon that day. You must have heard of her, Rachael. Quote, there was a dearth of visible debris on the relatively unmarked Pentagon lawn where I stood only minutes after the impact. Beyond this strange absence of airliner debris, there was no sign of the kind of damage to the Pentagon structure one would expect from the impact of a large airliner. This visible evidence or lack thereof may also have been apparent to the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, who in an unfortunate slip of the tongue referred to the aircraft that slammed into the Pentagon as a missile, unquote. We're almost up to our break. But if you've seen the footage of April Gallup, who worked in the Pentagon, she walked out with other employees right through that hole before the collapse. She saw no bodies, no airplane debris, no cushions, no luggage, nothing that would indicate an airliner had come through there. Major General Albert Stubblebine, I'm sure you've seen him, former head of U.S. Army Intelligence, says, where was the plane? He thinks the plane cannot have disappeared to the hole. He thinks it was a missile. Where's the impact of the engines on the side of the Pentagon? You don't see any indication that a plane hit it. So this started me looking at, okay, if no plane at the Pentagon or Shanksville, is it possible there was no plane at the World Trade Center? And we'll get into that, I think, on the other side of the break.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, the thing about the Pentagon always blew my mind because, come on, man, it's the Pentagon. That thing has satellites pointed at it from every other nation. People are watching that thing. We're watching that thing, and everybody's mind was blown. That was the thing that blew everybody's mind on 9/11, where I was working for the defense contractor. It's one thing to hit the World Trade Center. It's big. It's just sitting there. Mm-hmm. It's not protected by anything. It's another thing altogether to hit the darn Pentagon.
Exactly. Well, we're going to talk about major evidences why. I'm not going to rule out that something like a plane hit the World Trade Center, but we're going to rule out flights 11 and 175.
Excellent. Okay, everybody, we're going to take a break. Please come back with us. Oh my gosh, thank you for coming back for the second hour of Shadow Citizen. I can't believe we just made it through that first hour with James Perloff. He gave us an overview of his newest idea, what happened on 9/11. And we're going to continue because he left us with the Pentagon. He was talking last hour about the towers, and he gave the top 10 reasons why he thought Israel, in conjunction with our own government, was behind the 9/11 attack. But we just left off with the Pentagon, and I want to come back to that. James, fill us in with what you were talking about with the Pentagon.
Okay. Actually, I was just transitioning from the Pentagon. We were talking about how I'd heard the no planes theory, and I thought that's ridiculous. But then when I looked at the Shanksville evidence and the Pentagon evidence, not much evidence for a plane there. And so I said, well, what about if they use the same approach on all four targets? Is it possible there were no planes? And what I was saying was there's no way that 11 and 175 hit the towers, and let's talk about why that is. It's a matter of speed, accuracy, and the way they went into the buildings. Flight 175 was traveling at 590 miles per hour, and the max flying speed for a 767, I believe, is 424, so it's 170 miles over its max flying speed. Now, you could argue that, up at altitude where the atmosphere is thinner, it can reach high speeds, and if it dove down, maybe it still maintained that speed. But here's the problem. Pilots for 9/11 Truth has done a fantastic short video. It's called, you can see it on YouTube, it's called Airplane Controllability. And what they point out, Rachael, is that at 590 miles an hour, the wings are going to almost shear off. You run into what they call G-forces. The plane will be rocking back and forth. You can't control it at that speed. And they actually have a clip where several pilots tried to hit the World Trade Center at those speeds on a simulator. None of them could do it, Rachael. And these are guys with thousands of hours of experience flying Boeings. And we're supposed to believe that the Arab hijackers the very first time ever, got into a Boeing cockpit. These guys who couldn't control a twin-engine Cessna at 65 miles an hour, they both scored bullseyes at these impossible, uncontrollable speeds. And there's a point I want to make about this, Rachael, which is that everything seemed to go perfectly on 9/11. Both planes hit a bullseye. But think for a moment, supposing they didn't hit a bullseye, supposing Flight 175 had come down and it just missed, and the wing hit the building, right? What would happen, Rachael? What would happen is that 175 would have crashed somewhere else in New York City, but there's no way they could demolish the building if all they got was a little slice from a wing, right? Mm-hmm. The whole plane would have fallen apart. They had to be absolutely sure that both planes hit a bullseye, and there's no way at those speeds, if experienced Boeing pilots can't do it, there's no way a pilot could guarantee a dead-on hit. And of course, if the plane missed, they can't collapse the building, and the whole 9/11 phenomena falls apart. So they had a system in place. The other thing that discredits the idea that 11 and 175, the two flights, American 11 and United 175, hit the buildings, is the image. The images you see of 175, and you can see it on YouTube. When it goes into the building, the plane vanishes into the building. It's absurd. The tail vanishes in the building, the wings. Now, those are made of aluminum. They're fragile. They would have broken off. They would have shorn off. There's no way that they could cut through the 14-inch steel columns of the Twin Towers. This can't be done. If that was the case, we would make our artillery shields out of aluminum instead of steel. In fact, there's an analyst named Dmitry Kolizov. He made a pretty good point, and he's a nuclear advocate. He said that during World War II, and your World War II buffs will know this, the Soviets had a tough tank. It's called the T-34, and it was impervious to German artillery shells. Yet its steel was only 2 inches thick. Now, if 2 inches of steel can resist a steel artillery shell, which is traveling much faster than those airliners, how could these fragile aluminum wings cut through them? They can't do it. You're looking at a physical impossibility when you see this. You cut me off any time, by the way.
No, go right ahead.
So some people said, well, you know what? These must have been computer-generated graphics. After the fact.
Yeah, I heard about that. I don't know if that's true, but keep going.
I think that is not true, and here's why. There's a really excellent video on YouTube. I linked to it from my web articles. It's by Richard Hall, and he did tremendous work. He actually produced a scale model of New York City on his computer with all the landmarks. And then he took the 26 best videos of Flight 175 going into the South Tower, and from all different angles, and he established where the cameras were, and then he mapped out the route of those impact objects that were photographed. All 26 followed the precise same trajectory. Now, if this is just some guy who the next day made up a computer image, there's no way. Plus the fact, of course, that all those people in real time watched something that looked like a plane go into the World Trade Center. So the lesson of Richard D. Hall's film, Rachael, is that there was a real object that followed a trajectory and did hit the World Trade Center. So the question is, what was it? Because we know it couldn't have been the airliners for the reason we just gave, the impossible physics of aluminum floating right into the building and disappearing, and the impossible controllability of the planes at those speeds. So the first option, okay, so let me stop. So go ahead. Yeah. Okay. First option is a missile. And you might remember the earlier quote from the Lieutenant Colonel Katowski on Rumsfeld saying a missile went into the Pentagon. Okay. A missile solves these problems of speed, of accuracy, and of penetration. Because a missile can travel at those speeds. It doesn't have the G-forces against it. It can be precisely guided. And unlike an airplane whose plastic nose gets punched in by birds, if you've ever seen photographs of those, the nose cones being punched in by hitting birds, okay, yeah. A missile is hardened for penetration. It's designed for penetration. But that, of course, raises the all-important question, okay, so why did people see what looked like a plane? And the best answer for that, if these were missiles, would be this. The Air Force developed what is called an airborne holographic projector. And although they've taken it down from their Air Force website, people captured it on a screenshot, and it shows an airplane projecting the image of another airplane, which is complete fake. It's just a hologram to deceive an anti-aircraft gunner. And let me quote the Air Force's own website, okay? Quote, "The holographic projector displays a three-dimensional visual image in a desired location. The projector can be used for psychological operations and strategic perception and management. It is also useful for optical deception and cloaking, providing a momentary distraction when engaging an unsophisticated adversary. Then it says capabilities, precision projection of 3D visual images into selected area, supports PSYOP and strategic deception management, provides deception and cloaking against optical sensors, unquote. Now, if people don't believe in holograms, Rachael, Hollywood, Las Vegas, they'll put Elvis Presley on stage with a hologram, and it looks just like the real Elvis. It's three-dimensional, and it looks so real, you think it's the real Elvis. But, of course, he's been dead for years. But if Hollywood can do that and Las Vegas can do it, imagine what a military budget can do. And I'm sorry, did you want to interject something here? I'll continue. People might ask, well, could Israel do that?
It was a missile, but it was cloaked as a plane.
Right. Now, people might ask, can Israel do that? So let me quote the declassified Defense Department paper from 1987, Critical Technical Assessment of Israel. It says that the Israeli firm ELOP, that's EL-OP, was already developing holographic technology with, quote, stealth applications. That is 14 years before 9/11. But here's what really creeps me out, okay? Mm-hmm. In 1999, Israel commissioned her first Dolphin-class submarines. Now, up until 1999, Israel only had these old subs from the 70s. But in 1999, it released these new subs into the waters that could launch cruise missiles. And in the year 2000, U.S. Navy observed these Israeli submarines doing missile launch tests. So the Israelis absolutely had the capability to launch a cruise missile in 2001. And the timing, it keeps me up. Remember earlier I was saying that I didn't believe it was our own military attacking us. I believed it was Israeli military. This would clarify how they could have done it. Would be cruise missiles. And by the way, from conversation we had with our producer over the break, I should probably mention, I'm talking about Israel. A lot of people think that if you criticize Israel, you're anti-Semitic. I just want to mention I'm half Jewish. The name Perloff is an Americanization of Perlovsky. My father's parents were Russian Jews, came to America in 1904. So I'm not speaking out of anti-Semitism. Well, just to clarify that. Okay. All right. Now, again, cut me off at any point. I believe the Israeli art students were up there who cut their way to the edge of the World Trade Center in order to plant explosives. I do believe there were planted explosives in the World Trade Center, including thermite, the incendiary thermite, to create. So when the missile, if it was a missile, came in contact with it, that it would have detonated those planted explosives and created that perfect plane cutout. Okay. But the other possibility is a drone, and this is advocated by Chris Bolin, who I met last year. I asked him, I said, Chris, I'm not dogmatic about it, but I've heard this no plane theory, and what's your opinion? I don't want to put you on the spot. And he said that he believed that it would not be a missile. I'm sorry, he said it would not be a hologram, because if you look at the underside of Flight 175 in the images, you can see what looks like a missile. And so he felt it was a drone, and I thanked him very much. I didn't push the point, but I felt, okay, but how does a drone fly through steel? And my conclusion is that perhaps what we're looking at is a real missile on the underside of 175 projecting aircraft above it. But again, just to give credit to the drone hypothesis, they say they did find some aircraft parts in the World Trade Center vicinity. Of course, they also found unburned passports, but also there was an old plan. I'm sure you heard of it, Operation Northwoods, which was an old Pentagon plan to substitute drones for real airplanes to justify an attack on Cuba. And if in fact drones were sent up into the air, Rachael, it's interesting that there's a very strange coincidence that happened with Flights 11 and 175 out of Boston. They actually almost collided. They crossed each other's path, and when they did that, they were over or just about over Stewart Air Force Base. which would have been the ideal time to send up drones into the air that would tag along after the planes. So there's issues with the holographic theory, I acknowledge, but I also have issues with the drone theory. People have said, well, you can see that something lights up when that plane, when you could put it in slow-mo, you can see something lights up, and they say that it's launching the missile at the last second. But to me, Rachael, I don't see how a missile can gain the necessary acceleration to move ahead of the plane to clear a path for the drone to go into the, it's just in a split second, and there's no exhaust fumes coming from the back of that missile. So I'm willing to go either way. I know that Field McConnell, who's a old Air Force guy who is on 9/11 shows quite a bit, says he believes they were drones. So and the people in Pilot for 9/11 Truth think it was drones. So I could go either way on this one, but I will say it was not Flight 11 or Flight 175. And by the way, Rachael, you asked me a question privately the other day. Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay. You asked, and you kind of brought this up at Tonight Show, how did the Pentagon, with all its military defenses, get attacked successfully? How could it possibly let that happen? And I've been trying to research this drone hypothesis. So a couple of days ago, I was listening to a show that Phil McConnell did, this old Air Force guy. And here's how he explained it. I think it's pretty credible, Rachael. It's those military exercises on 9/11. Kevin Barrett, who's a well-known alt media guy, I was on his show, and he said that Chip Burlingame, who was the pilot on Flight 11, had been in a military exercise with a fake attack the year before. And what McConnell says, Rachael, is that on 9/11, their guard was down because they were anticipating military drill, false attack on the Pentagon. What they didn't know was that when Flight 11 came in, he says there was a drone right on its tail. And when Flight 11 flew over the Pentagon, that's when the drone went down, split second, banged into the Pentagon. They thought they were on a drill. But, of course, I asked the question, surely at this point, with both Twin Towers having been hit, they would have called off any drills and been on full alert. But that's his explanation, and perhaps it at least lends credibility to why the Pentagon's guard was down, because they thought the plane approaching was part of those multiple, what do they call it? Vigilant Guardian, all those military exercises that were going on that day.
Okay. I don't buy that, but anyhow, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I don't necessarily buy it either, but I thought it might speak to your question. That. Okay. All right. So now, so we've kind of addressed what brought the towers down and what hit the towers. So now I want to talk about what happened to the planes and passengers. And Rachael, I have totally gone in a different direction. When we were first going to do this show, I was going to talk about things like the head of security for American Airlines that day was Larry Wansley, former FBI agent, and how he called up his friend. The first thing he did was call his friend Danny Deffenbaugh of the FBI, who was also in charge of the Oklahoma City bombing, and supposedly the FBI first knew about the hijacking at 9 a.m. And I was going to ask, well, how then is it that Vanessa Minter at American Airlines Reservations, who took the first phone call from a frightened flight attendant, Betty Ong, says she took that call at 8:25, and at 8:30 an FBI agent took her off the phone. How is it that the FBI learned of this at 9 o'clock a.m., according to the 9/11 Commission, but Vanessa Minter says the FBI was already in her office at 8:30. But you know what, Rachael, we're going to leave that discussion aside because I've come to a startling conclusion about the planes, and I want to get into that. I discussed this with you privately before we had this show a few days ago. So here we go. Here's what we commonly say in alt media, in the 9/11 movement. We say, okay, about half the hijackers later turned up alive. These alleged Arab hijackers, right? We know that they turned up alive, and this was even in the European press just a few days after 9/11, that there was Saudi guys were saying, that's me, that's my ID, but I was not on those planes. I'm still alive. Look at me. We know about half those guys were alive, and we also know that they did not have the ability to pilot a Boeing. And so the truth movement has gone in this direction. We say, okay, if there were no hijackers on that plane, there was no hijacking. They must have been electronically hijacked. And so now we go down the road of, okay, the phone calls were faked. And so the question becomes, if the phone calls were faked, what happened to the people on the planes? And we say, well, there were no people on the planes, or they were calling from the ground. but the people disappeared. So what happened to the people? And we say, okay, well, they're paid off, big money, and they were sent to Tahiti or something with new identities. But my question is, if they went to for new identities, what if somebody had remorse and they said, I didn't know that they were going to destroy thousands of people, the World Trade Center? No, they had to kill those people. And another thing I hear is, we've heard, and I've looked at this stuff seriously, is that it was voice morphing technology. The CIA agents made those phone calls from the airplanes to people's homes, and they morphed their voices using voice prints. But some of the people had bought their ticket the day before, and so how did the CIA know who to morph? You know what I'm saying, Rachael? Mm-hmm. And I've come across a completely different. I'm going to go in a completely different direction on this. I'm going to say that there were hijackers on those planes, real hijackers on those planes, but they were not Arabs, as we were told. That was all BS that came from Muhammad Atta's luggage not making it onto Flight 11 and had all the names of the hijackers on it. And that's how the FBI said they got their info. And even when it turned out half those guys were alive, the FBI did not investigate who they were. The 9/11 Commission did not investigate who they were. I say the hijackers were on the plane. They were planting evidence, as you know, in the days leading up to 9/11. They were going to bars, leaving a Koran at the bar, leaving their IDs at the bar. They left a Koran and a flight training manual in a car at Logan Airport, et cetera, et cetera. I believe that the people on 9/11, the real hijackers, were part of Danny Lewin's team. I believe they were Israeli special ops, the equivalent of our Navy SEALs. I believe that they were probably the Sayeret Matkal, all of them. They'd gotten on the plane using the Arab IDs, but they were all special ops. And unlike the Arab Hani Hanjour and these Arabs, these guys knew Boeing's inside out. And how would that be, Rachael? Because they are from Israel, and Israel, their air company is El Al, and their fleet was loaded with Boeing 757s and Boeing 767s. These guys had countless hours at the controls of Boeings flying them, and they probably had a Boeing 767 in a hangar, and they probably drilled this hijacking and this cockpit seizure again and again. Okay, boys, 10 seconds, not bad. Let's see if we can get it down to 9 seconds. Okay.
Now, this is the guy that could kill people with a credit card. With a
credit card, a pen, or his bare hands, okay? And I believe probably all of them could. Now, one of the questions is, how do they get in the cockpit so fast? Because, Rachael, I've checked this out. My co-producer on the movie I scripted called Shattering, Mary Ellen Moore, she was a career flight attendant. And in 2001, she's given me I've confirmed everything with her. By 2001, whenever an airplane took off, the cockpit was locked. All right? It was always locked. And this is because of past hijackings. It was just a safety precaution. But so if the cockpit is locked, how do the Israeli ops get into it? Because they got a key. Okay? In every airline, in case it was an emergency, they had a key. The flight attendants had a key. Because what if something really weird happened, like both pilots had a heart attack? You got to be able to get into that cockpit. So they all had a key in a hidden place. But the guys on with the special ops I'm talking about, the Sayeret Matkal, they had their own key already with them. They would have gotten their keys from their El Al, from their Boeings. Okay, they already had their key on them. So how do they get into the cockpit so fast? Very easy. Okay, you wait till the hostess is distracted, the stewardess, the flight attendant is distracted, and probably they create a distraction. Danny Lewin says, miss, I just spilled my coffee. Could you help me clean it up? So while she's distracted, we know that two guys were sitting in the second row of first class. They go right up to the cockpit. They got their key. They're in no time, and those pilots are instantly killed. At that point, the hijackers are into the cockpit. They lock the door behind them, and one guy stands a guard outside. And that happened on each aircraft. They had this down to, they're not taking any chances, Rachael. They're not going to try and slam their way through a locked door. They got a key. And, I heard that, they held a box cutter to a stewardess's throat, and they said, open the door or the broad gets it. No. What if the pilot says, no, I don't care what you do? No, they got in because they had a key. All right. And it's true that stewardesses were stabbed because they tried to stop them from getting in on a couple of those planes. But if you look at the phone calls from 175, the pilots were killed immediately. And I'm going to call it now, Rachael. These are not fake phone calls. These are not crisis actors. These are real phone calls and real hijackers, but they're not Arabs. They're Israeli special ops. And this blew my mind, okay? Let me give you a quote. This is from the London Telegraph, September the 21st, 2001. Quote, accounts from the other doomed planes indicate the hijackers encouraged people to call their families and tell them what was happening, unquote. That is mind-blowing, Rachael. The hijackers told people to call, to let them know what's happening. Rachael, they're establishing the narrative. They want everyone to know that this plane has been hijacked by Muslim terrorists. Do you understand? But they are not amateur Arabs. They are Israeli professionals. Why in the world would they tell people these killers, tell everybody, call your families and tell them what's happening? These guys want to establish a narrative. Why don't they patrol the aisles, guarding and watching the passengers? Because they wanted to feel free to pick up those earphones and call people at home and tell them what's going on. They want the narrative established. You got it? This is
got it.
Totally changed my mind.
The narrative.
And
it's
now,
literally all about the narrative. And they've been doing this to us over and over and over with these different events in this country, all over the world right now, quite frankly. But it's all about the narrative. Go ahead. Continue on.
Exactly. So for me, Rachael, I'm done with the idea that these were fake phone calls, crisis actors pretending they paid the stewardesses $1 million to fake a phone call, or the CIA used voice morphing technology. I'm done with that. These were real people reacting to a real hijacking, but it's been done by Israeli special ops, not by amateur 5 foot. If you look at the size of these Arabs whose IDs they use are like 5'2", 110 pounds.
I could take them out.
They're not big guys like Danny Lewin who could bench press 315 pounds. I was on Kevin Barrett's show. We were joking. Danny Lewin was so big and strong, he could bench press 3 of those Arab hijackers.
Definitely. But
okay.
Here's the question, James. Well, here's the question. What happened to people that...
Okay. You cut out, but I heard your question. What happened to the people? Okay. You cut it out of me? Okay. What happened to the people? And that's exactly what I'm going to go next. Okay. After the missiles or drones hit the targets, it was necessary to silence these people, and they had to be killed. And let's talk about where they took the planes and what they did with the passengers. There's a lot of ways to kill people. I don't think they were machine gunned or something. I think that they were gassed with poison gas. Now, Phil McConnell says there's a way to do it from the cockpit where you put poison into the entire ventilation system of the aircraft. And he said it would kill people in 1.5 seconds. I don't know if that's true or not. I do know that according to reports from the calls, the hijackers displayed a bomb, and the hijacker outside the cockpit had something strapped to his waist that he said was a bomb. I don't think it's a prop, Rachael. I think it's probably a poison gas canister. You know, cyanide gas will render you unconscious in 30 seconds, and it will kill you in minutes. And I don't know, cyanide gas, I don't know what it was, and I'm not sure that what they called a bomb was a gas canister. But I think that the quickest and fastest way to kill the passengers, you open the cockpit door, you throw it into the fuselage. You go into that cockpit. All the hijackers are now wearing oxygen masks. They're sealed off in the cockpit. They're safe. The passengers are dead or unconscious almost instantaneously. I'm going to talk about where the planes went next, but you go ahead.
Don't the pilots have gas masks in there, like oxygen?
Yes. And my friend Mariel Moore, the flight attendant, said they've got outstanding flight masks. Oh, by the way, I asked her the key for the cockpits. Was it universal, or did each cockpit have its own lock and key set? She said she wasn't sure, so she asked her pilot friend. She says up until 9/11, it was a universal lock and key. So anybody could have, yes. Now they've changed that. Now they have individuated locks and keys, but at that time, anybody with a key from another Boeing could just instantly open that door. Okay, so right. I think the passengers are dead after they've made their phone calls and the drone or missile strikes have been made. So the question is, where do they take the airplanes? And I see we've got enough time to talk about this.
Oh, yeah, we got time. Go ahead.
Okay, I know people have said they went to military bases. I think that if they flew these planes to an American military base, they got big problems. So they got witnesses. They got to get rid of all these bodies. I think there's only one logical place. All of these planes were headed for the ocean. follow their flight paths. 77, if it flies over the Pentagon, it's going to head out to the Atlantic. And same thing with the World Trade Center planes. They're headed out for the ocean. And I think they're making a rendezvous with the submarine and that launched the missiles. And passenger planes can be landed in the ocean. There was a Chinese passenger jet with 396 passengers landed in the ocean. All 396 survived. These guys have practiced it. They know how to land a plane with its flaps up, its landing gear up, how to land. And when they land, how do they get out? They break a hole in they're near the sub at this point, or perhaps it's an Israeli vessel, but I think a sub is most logical. They broke open a window in the cockpit. They've got their life vests on, which American Airlines, United Airlines have kindly provided every pilot with. And the sub sends out a small craft to pick them up. And in the meantime, there's the aircraft, the airplanes sink to the bottom of the ocean. That is the best place to get rid of these planes, and the best place to get rid of these passengers is at the bottom of the sea. Because Rachael, look at the USS Maine, look at the the HMS Lusitania. Look at what they tried to do, the USS Liberty. The best place to hide the evidence of a false flag is at the bottom of the sea where nobody can get to it. And I believe that those planes rendezvoused, except for 93. And it's interesting that Phil McConnell, who's a former Air Force guy, is on a lot of 9/11 shows. He says that they all went down to what he calls Whiskey 386, which is it's a special reserved air training space 60 miles off the Virginia coast. He says that's where they all went. I'm going to play a little clip for you.
Yes, please. Okay, go ahead.
This is from documentary done by pilots for 9/11 Truth, and indicates that Flight 11 was still in the sky after the alleged hit. And they've got live recordings of the air traffic control and military guys on this documentary, so let me just bring it up. And this is pretty interesting.
When an unidentified target was approaching Washington, D.C. from the west, a message was sent out in the system that American 11 was still airborne.
Scoggins Military, Boston Center, just had a report that American 11 is still in the air and it's on its way heading towards Washington.
Okay, American 11 is still in the air on its way towards Washington?
There's only another aircraft at the tower. That's the latest report we have.
Okay.
I'm going to try to confirm an ID for you, but I would assume he's somewhere over either New Jersey or somewhere further south.
Okay, so American 11 isn't the hijack at all then, right?
No, he is a hijack.
American 11 is a hijack?
Yes.
And he's going into Washington?
It could be a third aircraft.
It could be a third aircraft going on to Washington. Do you have a...
Okay. Rachel, do you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I heard it perfect.
So there was a report, Flight 11 still in the air, headed south, another plane, something else hit the World Trade Center. That's confirmation. Now, some people think that's just a fake phone call that was inserted in. I think it's a real call that Flight 11 is still airborne, and would be further support for this interpretation. And Dick Cheney probably made sure that no American planes were out there. He was in charge that day. You can understand why they didn't put Bush in charge. They put him down to read a goat about a pet goat book.
Yeah.
They've got Dick Cheney in command in his bunker. And they're actually, if you listen to this entire documentary, it's called Intercepted by Pilots for 9/11 Truth. There were fighters headed out to the Whiskey 386 area, and they were called back to protect Washington. So our fighters did not go into that region where Phil McConnell says the planes actually went.
Then again, Whiskey 386.
Whiskey 386. Now, very little is said about this, and I don't know that Phil McConnell is right about that, but that's what he says, and it's just interesting that he has a parallel. He says the planes were disintegrated. I don't, because he talks about these advanced military explosives. I think if that happened, then the Israeli hijackers die. I don't think they would have done it that way, but.
Wait, so you're basically saying we've got the guy that can kill people with a credit card. Mm-hmm. He got on a plane. He hijacked a plane maybe with other people.
With at least four other people. Absolutely. Yep. At least four other people on Flight 11. They're part of his team. Yeah.
Okay. So now we got the guy that killed people with a credit card.
And I think the other guys could kill people with a credit card too, Rachel. These are the
okay, so we got
special ops Israel has.
We call the credit card killers. We got them. they hijack a plane. Their team hijacks some other planes. They're heading to the World Trade Center. They encourage everybody to make calls home.
Right, which they do. They're real phone calls, and they're reporting a real hijacking. Yeah,
real hijacking, real phone calls.
These guys know how to act like Arabs and shout Allahu Akbar, that kind of
right. Do all that stuff, and then the planes actually hit or do not actually hit? Is it just?
Oh, they do not hit. They're not a suicide mission. It's the missiles or drones. We're talking about either a missile or fired by an Israeli sub or a drone, which has been tagging along behind the plane. And Phil McIntosh says this is why you can't see it on radar, because they're so close. That's what hits the towers and which hits the Pentagon. The planes themselves then proceed out to the ocean. And I know people ask, well, why doesn't radar pick that up? There's so much confusion.
Credit cards.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. We turn them out to the ocean to meet up with a sub.
Right, a sub or an Israeli vessel, but I think a sub is probably a more likely conclusion. It would have fired the missiles if they were missiles. I'm insisting on that. But if it did fire missiles, then the ideal thing would be just rendezvous with a sub. It goes underwater. You sink the plane. The planes fall to the plane will float a little while before it sinks. They probably helped it sink by punching holes in the couple passenger windows. Plane goes down to the bottom of the ocean. Nobody knows what happened. That's the best way. The plane becomes a tomb for all those passengers.
Right. Okay. So now the whole point with Building 7 was mostly just because of the nuclear stuff that was blowing over, although you believe that was controlled demolition, right? Or
yes,
no?
Absolutely. That is a classic controlled demolition.
Okay.
Larry Silverstein's comment about pull it, and I've made the remark in my article Beyond 9/11 and Beyond that I think that the reason Larry Silverstein pulled it, Barry Jennings talked about all these dead bodies in Building 7 and all these fires and the heat, and it's going to be pretty hard for Larry Silverstein to explain that if the only attack is on the Twin Towers. How does, Building 7 was pretty far away. It's the furthest building away. I think Larry had less explaining to do if he just said the building collapsed than he had when it collapsed. Then he'd have to explain all those dead bodies and fires in Building 7, which were
How many dead bodies were in there?
Oh, nobody would know. But Barry Jennings said he stepped over many dead bodies, so nobody knows how many people were killed in Building 7 from that blast. But I think that was secondary blast from the nukes in the basement of the Twin Towers.
Okay.
Which leaves us with Flight 93, and so we have enough time to talk about Flight 93.
Oh, yeah, we got time. Go ahead.
Okay. So here's what I think happened on Flight 93. I think we've cheated Todd Beamer and those people on Flight 93 in the Truth Movement. I think there really was a let's roll. I think there really was an attempt to retake it. Now, as you know, Flight 93 took off very late. There was a 45-minute delay. And I would guess, Rachael, that the idea was to have Flight 93 probably hit the White House simultaneous to the Pentagon strike. But these guys are way behind. The passengers know what's happened in the Twin Towers in the Pentagon, and they do try to take the cockpit. The only difference is it's not Muslims, it's Israelis. And the indication for the phone calls is they overwhelmed the guy who is guarding the cockpit. Now here's what I believe happened, and Chris Bolin definitely agrees with me. Phil McConnell agrees it was destroyed, I think, in a different method. But there were reports that from an Air Force officer that Flight 93 was shot down. You can find that footage on YouTube. But what I believe happened, Rachael, was this. I believe that the passengers were breaking into Flight 93. I believe that the hole we see in Shanksville was from the discarded missile, which could no longer be used at this point. Chris Bolin talks about the scattered wreckage. This plane was apparently shot from the sky, and the wreckage was found everywhere. They found an engine a mile from that hole in Shanksville. There's no way an engine can bounce a mile. But I think what happened was this. Dick Cheney was in charge that day. The report came in that the passengers were trying to retake the cockpit. And just imagine this, Rachael. Supposing the passengers on Flight 93 took that cockpit back and they subdued the hijackers. And let's say that there's a passenger on board with some flight experience and the flight attendants know something about flying, and they take over the controls. With the help of air traffic control, they successfully land that plane. Maybe there's some people injured, but they're able to put that plane down. Now, if that happened, Rachael, 9/11, the entire plot will be destroyed, because if they have those hijackers, some of them alive, and they found out that they're Israeli special ops and that Israel did this, there's going to be no war in Afghanistan, no war in Iraq. The entire plot would be exposed. So I don't think I believe Dick Cheney did order the 93 shot down, but not to save the White House, but to save the plot. Because if they had brought that plane down, the entire 9/11 scenario would have been destroyed once they found out those hijackers were Israelis. Because Michael Chertoff could send home the dancing Israelis, but not the hijackers. He could send them back to Israel. So, of course, Dick Cheney had the perfect cover story. If this ever came out, he could say, well, I did it for America. I felt so deeply that I couldn't let another target be hit. But the real reason would be, maybe even in conjunction with Netanyahu, they said, okay, obliterate it. We're going to have to sacrifice 4 of our special ops. Well, I'm sure, Rachael, when those special ops took over those planes, they knew there was a risk. But to me, those guys on Flight 93, they should have just stayed in their seats, because actually enough damage had been done to set the entire strategy of wars in the Middle East in motion. They didn't need to hijack Flight 93, but they did. But I'm telling you at this point, Rachael, I believe there was a real hijacking, but by Israelis, and I believe all those phone calls were real, with possible exception of maybe someone like Barbara Bolson.
All right, James. So now that, what do we do if it came to pass that everything you just said actually can be proven and people believe it, and all of a sudden it gets spread everywhere that this is really what happened? What's the next step for the American people? What do we do to get justice?
Well, one thing we do, of course, is to keep spreading this message. And that's what the Truth Movement was founded on, and what we keep doing, and get more and more people on our side. And we're still playing out this greater Israel plan right now in Syria. It looks like Iran's next on the hit list. I'm a believer in the Bible, and I think that there's an outcome that's indicated. I think this is a Luciferian plan ultimately. And I believe that the good guys win in the end, but I also think that God wants us to win right here, to do His will on earth. So I think you made an interesting comment, when we spoke about this, off air a few days ago. You said, what do we do? And, how to bring them to justice. I think what you do is you find the most vulnerable person in this whole plot, and you don't try to, try Cheney and Netanyahu and the entire government at once. You go after the most vulnerable person who's part of this thing. You sue him. You put him in the courtroom like a cop would do, and you get him to plea bargain, and you start working your way up. That's how I would do it. But we obviously need a lot of help. We need people in the Justice Department. We need people in the court system. And you know how rigged that system is. Yeah. There's a lot of work cut out. You were a Ron Paul delegate. You know how challenging it is to change the system. So I'm not optimistic, but I think that our mission is to tell the truth and to do whatever we can within the scope of our abilities. And I hope that we can reach people in the justice system, in the American military, and in American intelligence who are still loyal Americans with the truth about this.
Okay. So when you say the weakest link, I can think of different things, such as the people at the air traffic control that may have been able to see, or even the people that were doing the seismic readings at the time.
That would be a great place to start.
You could start at those levels, and because if people are reading the radar, it's radar. It's just radar. It's not any crazy technology. If they're reading the radar and it shows something that supports this narrative that I think we're saying is a made-up narrative, if they saw that, then they must have been breached somehow. Or maybe it didn't go down the way that you're describing. But I think we have to dig into those little, like you just said, the little utsy little pieces of evidence. Dig into those and go up. I think that's a good idea.
Right. And another thing to bear in mind is that P-Tech and the MITRE Corporation have often been cited as having links to Israel, and they're providing software for NORAD, the FAA, the American military, and the FBI. It kind of reminds me of that movie, The Net, where the security system is actually being provided by the bad guys to all the American agencies. Do you remember that movie?
Yeah.
So, by the way, I've always compared your novel, your set of novels, Security Through Absurdity, which starts with the book called Little Yellow Stickies, where you talk about what was going on in the defense industry leading up to 9/11, to be a lot like the movie The Net. It reads like a suspense thriller, And you're kind of like Sandra Bullock's character in that, in that novel, which talks about your experiences under fictitious names.
That's right. Yeah, people do have to realize it is fiction, and it's listed as fiction. My books are in the Rhode Island and Connecticut public high schools, on reading lists, for summer reading lists too. It's all historical fiction, but everything that comes through the main character, I did experience in real life, just so you know.
Well, that kind of sums up what I wanted to say. But you again, just to throw it back to you, you had some amazing experiences in the Defense Department. And one of my favorite stories from you was when you went to the Pentagon, and this is in your book, and there was a general up there with all these potential threats that America faces. And there was one icon up there, and you didn't know what that icon was. You said, what's that icon? And everybody looked at you like, you don't even know. Why don't you tell people that story?
Yeah. No, that actually, it was on the 1-year anniversary of September 11th. And it was a marketing meeting for all the marketing communications people within L3. At that point, there were 64 divisions. All of us were at this hotel across, as a Sheraton, across the street from the Pentagon, and they had a general come up and talk to us about the different countries that the U.S. would be invading within the next, they were talking about the next 10 years, but it was...
Wow. Yeah, that's like General Wesley Clark then.
It's almost exactly the exact same list. They
got the same briefing then. They basically got the same memo. Okay.
Yeah, exactly the same. And when in the middle of that, when he finished up and it was just about lunchtime, all the fire alarms in the place went off and we had to evacuate, and we evacuated and we're staring at the Pentagon because there's really nothing else to look at. And all the other hotels on that street were getting evacuated, and they were all full of the other defense contractors having the same meetings. And at that point, one of the generals walked up and asked me and a coworker of mine if we wanted to go get some lunch because, it's going to be crazy for the next couple hours while all these big military fire trucks were rolling in and everything else. And so we said, okay, yeah, we'll go to lunch. And this white utility van pulled up, and we crawled into the utility van, and there were no windows on the utility van. And we were in there with other defense contractors who had been also talking to generals, and we're exchanging business cards, and we're swooping around. It feels like we're driving in circles. And we pull up to this office park. It's a small office park, all brick buildings. And we go into the garage, and they offered us straps, cokes, and we had to sign non-disclosure agreements. And then we all piled into this tight little conference room, and they started showing us the desktop image of their new, it was called Project Lisa. And this was before I knew about the NSA or any of this stuff. And they were talking about tracking communications to bank accounts that might be involved with terrorist activity. And mind you, this is the 1-year anniversary of September 11th. And we're all just like, whoa, we got our sandwich wraps and everything. And then all the icons come up on the screen, and it's projected, and it's dark in there. And I raised my hand, and nobody else raised their hand. And they said, oh yeah, what's your question? I said, well, that icon up there, I don't recognize what that is. The other ones were easy, like a rock. The other one was like a atom bomb going off. The other one was, a money symbol, different things you could understand what was going on. This one I couldn't understand. I said, what is it? He goes, well, come up and point to it. So I got up and I walked over and I pointed to it and I said, it looks like a UFO. I was like laughing. And he goes, it is a UFO. I was like, So I had to go sit back down while everybody's looking at me. And then one of the generals, the general that drove us there, he said, no, the United States military does have to have plans in place for things, very, very odd things that might happen. And we have the plans sealed. And should we get word, for instance, if there was a nuclear bomb going to come and hit the United States, we'd unzip that bag and we'd have the plans in place, and we'd get everybody scrambled, and we'd take care of the threat. And I was like, well, I was sitting there though in my head at the time, at this 1-year anniversary of September 11th, I'm thinking, well, why didn't you have plans for planes hitting the World Trade Center? And of course, now I know they did. They did have plans for that. But so anyhow, long story short, we get out of there, and it was about, I want to say, I don't know how many months later, but it was disclosed in the newspaper that it was a utility worker, a phone worker, had gone and accidentally cut the cords, the cables to all the hotels on that street, and that's what made all the fire alarms go off at that exact time after that speech was over with, at just about lunchtime on the anniversary of September 11th.
Kind of strange that that would occur right on that anniversary, the way it did. I'm sorry, Rachael, you're cutting out on me again, which means our listeners can't hear us. Let me mention a little bit more, as long as we're on 9/11, about Larry Wansley, the head of security for American Airlines. I mentioned before that he said that he got word of the attack, and he called his friend Danny Defenbaugh, who was in charge of the FBI's agent. He was the FBI special agent in charge closest to him in Dallas. He'd been the guy who had investigated the Oklahoma City bombing, and there's an amazing article in the Dallas Observer written by Wansley's co-author Carlton Stowers. Defenbaugh is talking to Stowers, and let me just quote what this article says, because, Rachael, I'm sure you heard that George Bush said he saw the first plane hit, and everybody, he says, boy, that was a really bad pilot, and people said, well, how can you possibly see the first plane hit, since he is, supposedly nobody can do that on 9/11. Well, there seems to be at least this co-author of Larry Wansley, who again was a former FBI agent in charge of security for American Airlines on that morning. According to the article, this is when Wansley's on the phone to Defenbaugh at the FBI. It says, quote, as he began relaying the information, Wansley heard a sudden chorus of muted screams from an adjacent conference room. Several female employees, eyes fixed on a television, had just watched a plane fly into the North Tower, that's the first tower, of New York City's World Trade Center. Phone still in hand, the security director emerged in time to see a cloud of black smoke billowing from the building. In downtown Dallas, Defenbaugh's secretary had entered his office and turned on his TV. Did you see that? The FBI agent asked Wansley. Neither, however, connected the gruesome images they were watching with their own immediate concern. The initial television reports were suggesting that it had been a small private plane that had flown into the Trade Center. So Wansley's co-author, Carlton Stowers, is suggesting that Defenbaugh and Wansley were actually able to see the first plane hit. I actually think that he's probably just taking a writer's license with this and is probably just embellishing the story. But it is interesting that it corresponds to what President Bush said about having seen the first plane hit on the morning of 9/11. Rachael, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm listening.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure if we lost you.
No, I'm listening to everything. Go ahead.
No, that was that was where I was going to start going with. It was American Airlines, and but as I started to realize that there were real hijackers that day, I realized I really needed to take this in a totally different direction. You know, the things I spoke about tonight are things I've only come to mind. And you know what did it for me, Rachael?
No.
Was when I started looking at this. Okay, if this is an Israeli operation, if it's like the USS Liberty and the attack is being carried out by Israelis, then how would they do it? And I realized, yeah, you would put real hijackers on that plane and create that narrative. You've done everything you can already with the Muhammad Atta's so-called luggage. Why would you take luggage on a suicide mission? It doesn't make any sense, you know. But they made sure that the luggage didn't get on the plane, so the FBI was able to find it. And they made sure that there was Muhammad Atta, quote-unquote, left a plane at Logan with a Koran and a flight training manual. and they made sure that a guy went to a strip club and left his in Florida and said America's going to see bloodshed tomorrow, and left his Koran at the bar along with his ID. You know, for everybody to find, they're planning this trail of evidence, and it's clear that they just continued that with the on 9/11 itself by actually hijacking the aircraft, making out that they were Israelis, killed the passengers, and then went on their merry way. And I believe that is the explanation, probably the best explanation, but it's nothing I would dogmatically insist upon. As you can see, Rachael, I've changed my mind on 9/11 about a number of things. I said before I thought no planes hitting the World Trade Center was impossible and ridiculous, and I may change my mind on this one again, but right now I think that this is the most likely scenario. Just my own view, but I'm willing to change my mind on it again as you know, more evidence comes out. But I'd like to really nail this thing down and as to how exactly it was done.
Go to your blog. If you haven't been to JamesPerloff.com, you should go. He's got a plethora of posts there that are just mind-blowing. They're so well researched. And if you want to follow what he was talking about tonight in this interview, check it out. I'm halfway there with you on this. I think this is one of the best theories that I've heard so far, James, to tell you the truth. I'm still not all the way on this Pentagon thing because it's the Pentagon, for God's sake.
Well, they had to have some way of doing it. Somebody had to have their fingers down on the suppress the defenses button for this to go off. Yeah, they definitely got hit by something. But how and why? Maybe it was partly because of those defensive drills that were taking place that day. They were off their guard.
Well, right on, James. Thank you so much for being with us. It's James Perloff. Thank you so much.